12 days into the rush evacuation from Kabul and 5 days before its scheduled completion, deadly suicide attacks have rocked Kabul airport. But US President Joe Biden remains undeterred from the US mission to evacuate thousands of Americans and Afghan civilians from the country. It was the worst day of casualties for the US forces there in a decade. The blast killed more than a dozen American troops and scores of civilians. Yet, Biden is determined to complete the evacuation of Americans and vulnerable Afghans. While the Pentagon develops plans to strike back at the ISIS, which has claimed responsibility for the attack, Biden has promised that US evacuations would continue without giving any indication of a change in next Tuesday's US pullout target. Biden has told the US military that he would grant additional forces if needed. He defended his handling of his most serious foreign policy crisis, saying that ultimately it is his responsibility for all that's happened of late. Biden is hopeful that the Taliban will let the evacuations continue, given the group's interest. That is the group's self-interest, of course.
We will not be deterred by terrorists. We will not let them stop our mission. We will continue the evacuation. I've also ordered my commanders to develop operational plans to strike ISIS-K assets, leadership, and facilities. We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, in a moment of our choosing. Here's what you need to know. These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans who are there. We will get our Afghan allies out, and our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated, and I have the utmost confidence in our brave service members who continue to execute this mission with courage and honor to save lives and get Americans, our partners, our Afghan allies out of Afghanistan.
The United States has evacuated more than 100,000 people from Afghanistan since August 14th. That was the eve of the Taliban's return to power. Yet as many as 1,000 Americans and many more Afghans are still struggling to get out of Kabul. Dashing hopes of several Afghans, the White House has now indicated a fragmented evacuation. The White House said that it will not be possible to evacuate every Afghan who wants to get out of the country before the US military withdraws its troops on August 31st.
It is not going to be possible for every single Afghan, millions potentially, who want to leave Afghanistan to be evacuated.
Our correspondent Susan Tehrani now joins us live from New York for more on the U.S. stance on Afghanistan. Susan, thanks so much for joining us. Now, President Biden, of course, has vowed revenge or retribution after the attacks that we witnessed yesterday. What more can you tell us about how his response to this crisis is being perceived in the United States, and also about the pace of evacuations as several Western nations pause their evacuations already?
Priyanka, what we do know right now is these evacuations have continued, although the manner that it's continuing has really been reduced right now because of security concerns. Biden's speech was received really with much criticism here in the United States, considering the fact that Americans were ultimately killed in Afghanistan, despite the fact that there were assurances by this administration, notably by the commander-in-chief himself, that this was not going to happen. And the criticism really came from the fact that ultimately, why is it that the United States put the security and so much reliance, heavy reliance, in the hands of the Taliban in such a critical time to get American civilians out? And why was it that this really had to get to the point that it did? Another central question was that something like this could have been prevented if President Biden himself would not have authorized the U.S. military to leave Afghanistan before civilians were evacuated, and images coming out of Afghanistan showing really that it was near impossible to have everyone checked, searched, before getting to the airport and then leaving Afghanistan, almost, as one journalist put it, creating a quote-unquote Disneyland for terrorists before arriving to the perimeters of the airport. In terms of the GOP leadership, you can imagine what's going on there. Senator Hawley, a Republican from Missouri, called on the GOP leadership, considering the fact that Capitol Hill is on recess right now. He called on the GOP leadership to come back to Washington to call for President Biden's impeachment, and we're hearing calls for resignation on the part of the Republicans right now, saying that he's just not fit to lead and is putting American lives at risk.
Susan Tehrani, thank you so much for all those updates from New York, and thank you for joining us. We have another guest joining us at this hour. Joining us live from New Jersey is Bill Roggio, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense and Democracies. Bill was also embedded with the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Army and Iraqi forces in Iraq between 2005 and 2008. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you. President Joe Biden has vowed to hunt down the perpetrators of the suicide bombings in Kabul, but what really are his options? How can the U.S. achieve anything without any boots on the ground?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The U.S. withdrawal has dropped the visibility you need intelligence to drive an operation to target an underground terrorist organization like the Islamic State Khorasan province. With the U.S. gone, there is zero visibility because that operation at the airport is a rescue mission. It's not a counterterrorism mission. The National Directorate of Security, Afghanistan's intelligence service, is no more. The Afghan army is no more. What Afghan in his right mind would support the United States and provide intelligence on terrorists after the U.S. abandoned their country and threw the Afghan army under the bus said that they wouldn't fight when more than 60,000 have died over the years. And also, the U.S. has been, are we going to rely on the Taliban? This is the problem in all of this. The U.S., the Biden administration, and even generals and admirals are saying, General McKenzie, commander of CENTCOM, has called the Taliban for Afghanistan. They're trusting terrorists, the Taliban, which uses suicide bombers, to protect American and Western and Afghan citizens from another terrorist group that uses suicide bombers, the Islamic State. And this is the result that you get.
Right, Bill, since you mentioned the Taliban as well, do you think, it's undeniable at this point that the Afghanistan crisis is now becoming the biggest problem for the Biden administration. In your assumption and experience, how should the U.S. government handle this crisis going forward?
I think President Biden, I don't see this ending well for him. The administration is just in a crisis. And what it's hoping to do is just extricate itself from Afghanistan without taking any further casualties. That's what he's going to do. That is going to leave Afghan partners who helped the United States for 20 years at risk, possibly leave behind American citizens. There is no way out for this for the Biden administration. He's dug this hole for himself, and he keeps trying to dig his way out of the hole, and that's not going to happen. His hope is that once the U.S. leaves, Afghanistan disappears from the news, from the front page, and that he can move on to other issues. He's hoping the American public will forget this catastrophe, the chaos that they've witnessed over the last month plus in Afghanistan. That's really his exit plan for Afghanistan, his political plan.
Let's talk about the Taliban. Now, the Taliban, of course, rule Afghanistan as of now. Can they be trusted to secure the capital, to secure the country, to protect the citizens from attacks such as this in the future?
Absolutely not. The Taliban said prior to 9/11 it wouldn't allow al-Qaeda to conduct attacks against the West. Then we had the embassy bombings and 9/11 occurred. The Taliban's own emir, Mullah Habibatullah Akhundzada, his son was a suicide bomber in Helmand province in 2017. This is a group that has not moderated. We're witnessing this chaos in Kabul, which is orchestrated by the Taliban. They're now preventing Afghans who need to leave the country from leaving. They're going door to door, beating people and arresting people. What's happening in the provinces, from what I'm hearing outside of Kabul, is horrific. And nobody can record this because journalists aren't allowed to report from areas outside of Kabul at this point in time. It's a totalitarian state. The Taliban will rule as it did from 1996 to 2001 before it was ejected. Meet the new Taliban. It's the same as the old Taliban.
Right, Bill, thank you so much for all your perspective, and thank you for joining us on WION at this hour.
My pleasure. Thank you.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.